Jesse, Brianna, is it just us at the moment, or is there a function to let folks in?
I don't see anyone.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, it says we do have 6
Yeah.
attendees.
Yeah, there's
so
people
we can't
in.
see them.
Oh, okay, great. I can only see our gallery here of panelists. Perfect.
For everyone that's on right now, welcome and thank you for coming. We're gonna wait just a few more minutes, maybe until 5:35, and then we'll get started with the presentation. For anyone who's just arriving, we're going to get started in just a couple of minutes here. We're going to wait for everyone to arrive. Okay, well, it's 5:35, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started now. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending this scoping meeting for the County of Santa Barbara's 2023-2031 Housing Element Update. We're excited to have you all here. My name is Jessie Steele, and I'm a senior planner with the county's Long Range Planning Division and one of the project managers for the Housing Element Update. So I'd like to start off by introducing some of our other county staff that are here. We have Brianna Alamia, a planner 2 on our housing element team, and she's going to be our meeting facilitator this evening, and she'll be available to help answer any technical questions in the chat. So if you can't hear or can't see the slides, she's your girl. She'll help you out. We also have Dan Clement, the Deputy Director of our Long Range Planning Division. And I'm going to turn it over to Wood, our environmental consultant, for their introductions.
Hi there. My name is Nick Meisinger with Wood Environment and Infrastructure Solutions. I'm a environmental planner and CEQA specialist, and I'll be managing the preparation of the environmental impact report. for the housing element update. With me this evening is Sarah Anderson. She is also a CEQA specialist and assisting in managing our internal team and our team of sub-consultants. I'll also just briefly introduce our sub-consultant fair and peers. They're assisting with the preparation of a transportation study, which will be assessing vehicle miles traveled, policy consistency, and a variety of other transportation related issues.
Great, thank you, Nick. As far as an agenda for this evening, we're going to provide an overview of the housing element update and the environmental impact report, or EIR process. And then we're going to close with discussing opportunities to provide comment and stay involved with this project. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. This meeting is being recorded and it will be posted on the Planning and Development Department's YouTube page and our Housing Element Project webpage. Please use the chat for technical questions only. We ask that everyone provide their scoping related comments verbally at the end of the presentation or submit written comments via email or letter, and we'll provide staff contact at the end of the presentation for that purpose. Everyone right now is on mute. If you would like to ask a question, please use the raise hand button and we will get to your questions in the order they were received at the end of the presentation. Brianna will be keeping track of everyone who wants to speak and will unmute you when it's your turn. So tonight's meeting serves many purposes. First, this meeting is intended to provide a summary of the county's housing element update and provide an overview of the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, and EIR processes. This is also our initiation of public outreach for the EIR process. We've notified the community and public agencies that we are proceeding with environmental review and that we are requesting comments on the scope of the EIR. Lastly, this meeting is meant to inform the community of future opportunities to provide input and stay involved. So the housing element is a state mandated requirement for all cities and counties in California. Originally established in 1969, state housing element law and the California Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, require that every jurisdiction does their part in planning for their community's housing needs on an 8-year cycle. The state can impose penalties such as charging fines or withholding grant funding if a jurisdiction fails to plan for their housing needs. So aside from penalties, why should we update the housing element? As I just mentioned, we need to adequately plan for the housing needs for our community. And to that end, the housing element needs to include an assessment of housing needs and characteristics, as well as identify barriers to the development of both affordable and market rate housing. The housing element also must evaluate progress in removing barriers and implementing other housing element programs from the previous 8-year cycle. The housing element also needs to identify sites that can accommodate the community's housing needs and establish programs to implement housing goals, policies, and actions. So let's talk about how the county's housing need is determined. First, HCD provides each region in California with a regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA for short. And this RHNA includes a total number of units that are split into 4 income categories, which we'll touch upon later. Next, councils of governments are responsible for developing a methodology for allocating the total RHNA to each city and county in the region. The Santa Barbara County Association of Governments, or SBCAG, is the council of governments that is responsible for divvying up the total RHNA in our region. Every city and the county must then adopt a housing element that demonstrates, amongst other things, how each jurisdiction can accommodate its assigned RHNA over the 8-year cycle, which in this case runs from 2023 to 2031. So this chart provides a visual of the RHNA process that I just mentioned. First, HCD provided the total RHNA for our region to SBCAG in March of 2020. And from there, SBCAG worked with the county and cities to equitably distribute the RHNA to every jurisdiction. SBCAG adopted the 6th cycle RHNA plan in July of 2021. And since then, the county and cities have been working to update their respective housing elements to accommodate their RHNAs. The county's housing element update, which addresses only the unincorporated areas of the county, must identify potential housing opportunity sites and, as necessary, rezone sites, and consider new policies and programs to facilitate additional housing. So now I'll talk about the county's RHNA specifically. SBCAG's RHNA plan took a bit of a different approach than in previous RHNA plans. And for this cycle, they have set housing unit targets for both the unincorporated North County and unincorporated South Coast areas, as shown on this map. And this table here shows the county's RHNA for the unincorporated North County and South Coast areas. The RHNA is distributed across 4 household income categories. They are very low, low, moderate, and above moderate income. And the income distribution is set by the state's affordability calculations and the median household income for Santa Barbara County. One thing that's important to note here is that the RHNA numbers shown are just the bare minimum that the county is required to accommodate in its housing element in order to comply with state law and SBCAG's RHNA plan. Next slide, please. County staff have been hard at work at developing a sites inventory, which shows the county's existing capacity for new housing under current zoning at each of the 4 RHNA income levels. The preliminary results of the sites inventory show that the county is facing a shortfall of units across almost every income category in both the North County and the South Coast. So this means that the county must consider potential strategies for accommodating its RHNA. And some of the strategies are listed on this slide, and they include upzoning residential properties to allow a greater density of housing units, rezoning agriculturally zoned parcels within or adjacent to existing urban areas, allowing more housing in commercial zones, and establishing minimum housing requirements to ensure that land resources are used efficiently. Other potential housing strategies to meet affordability targets could look like something like accessory dwelling units or ADUs. And the housing element is also going to include an assessment of special housing needs for seniors, farm workers, and other groups, as well as analyze opportunities for the preservation of existing affordable housing units. County staff are considering housing opportunity sites throughout the unincorporated county, but as a starting point, we are focusing on the areas and communities listed on this slide. So for the South Coast, we have Eastern Goleta Valley and the Carpinteria Valley. And in the North County, we have Orchid, the Vandenberg Village Mission Hills area, the San Ynez Valley, and New Cuyama. And this slide here shows some major milestones that we have in our housing element update timeline. County staff plans to release the draft sites inventory for public review in mid-September, and we will continue public outreach as we draft the housing element update and conduct decision maker hearings. The draft housing element is expected to be released for public review in December 2022 or early 2023, and the program EIR is expected to be completed around mid-2023. Lastly, we plan to complete the final housing element update and have it adopted by our Board of Supervisors in mid-2023. And with that, I'll hand it over to Nick and his team so they can talk about CEQA.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jesse. So as Jesse mentioned in the introduction, one of the primary purposes of today's scoping meeting is to initiate the CEQA process with the public and relevant agencies. So I'll start by providing kind of a brief overview of the California Environmental Quality Act and its purpose. CEQA is at its roots a disclosure law. It's an information disclosure law, and the intent of the CEQA process is to inform decision makers and the public of potential physical impacts to the environment that could result from a project or a program in this case. CEQA is also intended to help minimize or avoid these impacts altogether, either through the identification of mitigation measures or the identification of alternatives that look at different ways to achieve the project objectives. CEQA is also intended to foster public participation and agency involvement in the planning process. And lastly, it's intended to give the public and the agencies an understanding of the rationale for the decision making of the lead agency. So with respect to the housing element update itself, there are three general levels of CEQA compliance documentation. There's exemptions, negative declarations, or environmental impact reports. Environmental impact reports are reserved for projects that have the potential to result in significant environmental effects. So we are preparing a program EIR for the housing element update. And on this slide is kind of an overview of the key milestones in that process. The preparation of the EIR starts with the release of the notice of preparation, which notifies the public and relevant agencies that the lead agency, the county in this case, intends to prepare an environmental impact report. And that kicks off a 30-day scoping comment period, which we are in now. And in the middle of that period is a scoping meeting, which you are all attending now. Following the receipt of public comments on the scope of the environmental impact report, then our team will begin the process of evaluating the physical environmental impacts associated with the housing element update. After that process is complete, the public draft EIR will be released, and that will kick off another public review period. Following the conclusion of that public review period, we will incorporate comments or incorporate responses to comments provided on the draft EIR and release the final EIR for public consumption. And then the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors will consider certification of the final EIR and potential approval of the housing element update or one of the alternatives evaluated in the program EIR. CEQA prescribes a suite of environmental resource areas that are analyzed in each environmental document, as you can see on this slide. The intent of this meeting in the scoping process is to narrow down the key issues and the potential impacts of concern with respect to the community and the relevant public agencies. So what we'll do on the following slides is discuss a couple of the key issues that are recognized and disclosed in the environmental scoping document that was released with the NOP. And then as a part of the scoping comment period of this presentation, the verbal comment period, that'll be an opportunity for members of the public to bring up other issues or areas of concern with respect to physical environmental impacts. And then, of course, there'll be the opportunity to submit written comments as well. So again, these slides will look very similar to the environmental scoping document that was released with the NOP. If you have not yet seen that environmental scoping document, please do take a look. It gives a bit of an overview of what the program EIR will look like in terms of the environmental impact analysis. I guess it's important to remember at a broad level that the program EIR is evaluating the capacity of the county to accommodate the increase in housing associated with the housing element update, and will evaluate the physical environmental impacts that result from that. So a couple of resources of note with respect to agricultural resources. The program EIR will be evaluating the potential impacts associated with conversion of ag lands. It will also look at potential conflicts with agricultural operations, and we'll consider things like Williamson Act contracts and other agricultural resource policies as well. The program EIR with respect to air quality and greenhouse gases will make assumptions about the levels of development and housing, and it will calculate emissions resulting from construction as well as operational emissions associated with residential uses. And then it will also look at consistency with regulations and policies and other longer range planning efforts. With respect to energy, the EIR will estimate energy demands, and CEQA was very specific in talking about whether or not a project or a program would result in any wasteful, inefficient, or unnecessary consumption of energy, be it electrical power, natural gas, or other similar resources. When it comes to cultural and tribal cultural resources, the EIR will programmatically look at prehistoric, historic, and tribal cultural resources across the county and across the unincorporated areas of the county. It will also consider the results of Native American consultation pursuant to Assembly Bill 52 and Senate Bill 18. When it comes to biological resources, the program EIR will consider direct loss, i.e. conversion of habitat, or indirect effects such as noise, for example. It will look at and identify sensitive species, wildlife corridors, and it will consider environmentally sensitive habitat areas as well. With respect to hydrology and water quality, the EIR will consider water courses within the county. It will look at flood areas. It will look at surface water quality as well. And then it will also identify potential issues associated with groundwater. With respect to land use and planning, the EIR will evaluate policy consistency, and it will look at land use compatibility issues. We'll also consider resource preservation, open space policies, as well as transportation policies and other similar planning and policy related issues. The program EIR will also evaluate population and housing projected growth throughout the state and the county, and it will look at how the housing element accommodates that projected growth. With respect to public services and recreation, the program EIR will consider public service providers in the county, such as fire protection, police protection. We'll look at emergency medical services and response. It will consider both facilities as well as response times and service ratios as well. For example, when it comes to public parks and recreation space, it will look at the number of acres of parkland per capita, and how that changes with respect to build out under the housing element update. When it comes to utility and water supply, domestic water use is obviously a big issue when it comes to housing. So we'll look at water consumption. We will be preparing a water supply assessment, and that assessment will address multi-year drought conditions as well as normal conditions. We'll also look at wastewater generation treatment, both in terms of, again, the facilities and the capacity of those facilities to handle increases in generation and need for treatment. And similarly, we'll look at solid waste generation and issues around diversion and disposal, recyclables, as well as other solid landfill waste. When it comes to wildfire, the EIR will consider potential for housing development to exacerbate the risk of ignition, introducing more ignition sources. We'll look at potential issues around post-fire debris flows and planning and accommodation with respect to the wildland urban interface and other related issues. Last few here, noise, similar to air quality, the EIR will make some assumptions about the rate of development, and we'll look at issues related to construction noise and groundborne vibration, and we'll also look at operational changes in noise. And generally, when it comes to housing element updates, that focuses around roadway noise and vibration levels, but we'll also look at other common sources of noise associated with residential development. The program EIR will include a transportation study. And again, as I mentioned early on, that will include an analysis of vehicle miles traveled consistent with the requirements of Senate Bill 743. And the county has recently adopted VMT tools and thresholds around VMT. It will look at circulation plans and policies, such as the circulation element of the comprehensive plan. And then it will programmatically evaluate other issues like geometric hazards and evacuation and emergency access from emergency service providers. The EIR, in addition to analyzing each of these resource areas for the housing element update itself, it's required to analyze impacts associated with alternatives to the proposed project. So under CEQA, the EIR is required to analyze a range of reasonable alternatives. There's no set number of alternatives. One of the things that we'll consider as a part of the scoping process is any ideas that a public or agency has with respect to alternatives. But the general intent of those alternatives is to reduce the significant environmental impacts while also achieving the project objectives. So the alternatives will look at different strategies to help achieve the RENA, which again is a state mandated issue. And again, the alternatives will be informed in part by public and agency input. So now we'll move on to the scoping comment process and talk a little bit about how scoping comments can be provided. But before we get there, one of the things that I like to touch on during these scoping meetings is how to best provide scoping comments. It's important to realize that this is very early days in the EIR process. No decisions are being made with respect to the housing element update or any of its alternatives. So this is not the right time to voice approval or support, or it's really the time to focus on the technical issues that should be addressed in the EIR. It's not an up or down vote. So to the extent that we can focus on the technical issues, that gives Sarah and I and our EIR team the ability to provide comprehensive responses and robust analyses in the EIR that address those comments. If it's a simple up or down vote as part of the scoping comment, there's not much for us to do with that in the EIR. So that's something that should be at the forefront of your mind as you're providing scoping comments, either verbally or in writing. And then, in addition to the technical issues, any ideas or suggestions for mitigation measures that should be considered in the EIR, or any ideas or suggestions with respect to alternatives or the range of alternatives that should be considered, those would also be appropriate and appreciated at this time. And again, the comments should focus on the physical environmental impacts to the extent possible. So here are a couple of ways to submit scoping comments. Jesse kind of touched on this at the beginning. Comments can either be provided in written form via email or by letter to Jesse's contact information here. We have an email address and then a physical address for letters or comments that are delivered by mail. And then again, tonight at the conclusion of this presentation, which I promise is soon, you will have the opportunity to provide verbal comments if you would like. And in order to do that, what we'd ask is you hit the raise your hand function that's at the bottom of your screen if you are attending this Zoom webinar over your computer. And that will allow Brianna to see that you would like to make a comment, and she will be calling on folks and requesting to unmute as she works through the list. Before we get there, I just wanted to again remind folks of the opportunities to stay involved. So again, we're in the middle of a 30-day NOP comment period that ends on September 9th. So please do provide your comments before 5 p.m. on September 9th. That will ensure that they are incorporated into the scoping report that will be provided as an appendix to the program EIR. After that, after the conclusion of the scoping comment period, again, we will be evaluating potential physical and environmental impacts as a part of the development of the EIR. That public draft EIR will be released in 2023, at which time you will all have another 45-day comment period, during which time the comments will be focused on the extent to which the EIR characterized the impacts. And then following the preparation, the release of the final EIR, that's when we get to Planning Commission, Board of Supervisor, decision maker hearings. So at that stage is where comments about approval of the project are most appropriate. Lastly, here is the link to the website where all things housing element are located. So this is a great place to check in regularly to see how the process is coming along. So with that, I will reverse back to this slide so folks can see the various avenues to submit written comments. And then Brianna, I will pass the microphone over to you to let in any commenters. And I will note that just in order to allow everybody an appropriate amount of time to provide their comments, I will be running a little timer over here. If your comments run beyond the 5-minute clock, please feel free to submit the rest of your comments in writing, and we will ensure that those are incorporated and addressed in the program EIR. So with that, I will pass it over to you, Brianna.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, so for our first comment, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Mary O'Gorman. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Mary.
Okay. Hi, I'm assuming you can hear me. So
we can hear you.
Okay, good. And I just wanted at this point, because I'll be submitting some written comments, but just a couple thoughts about outreach. And that is, I would just encourage some more robust outreach, perhaps a press release, such as the cities of Goleta and Santa Barbara did, to let people know not just the sort of technical terms, scoping and all of that, but really the meat of this, which is that the South Coast, and now from what I see in your PowerPoint, actually 2 communities in the South Coast must absorb 73% of a 5,600 units. So, people need to hear really what potential impacts there are and the value and the importance of offering comment. So consider some things such as using the mailing lists for the previous housing element updates and the community plans that were done. I know for Eastern Goleta Valley, there were a lot of people very involved for about 8 years. Some of them, might not be aware that that the potential to undo a lot of what they worked on exists. So perhaps using those mailing lists in addition to, like I said, a press release or something like that, a presentation at a board meeting, although it looks like that'll be, later. I also wanted to talk a little bit about what I think is part of this process, which is different than any other housing element updates I've observed, and that is looking at some policies for how to retain and stop losing our existing affordable, especially lower middle and middle income. And that is what I've seen as a resident of the unincorporated area for a long time is short-term rentals eating up a lot of what used to be workforce housing around here. I just took a quick look at one site tonight. There's dozens of homes and rooms between Turnpike and Patterson going for anywhere from $191 a night to $5,000 a night. They're being marketed to families of UCSB students, vacationers. So please, look at the existing short-term rental ordinance to see if it's adequate, and also look at some potential violations out there that exist. I know that the homestay program was sort of marketed as, you know, granny renting a room in her house. But from what I see in the homestay permits that have been issued, people are using pretty much their entire home, 3 bedrooms, 2 adults each. And these are homes that used to be occupied by workforce, county employees, teachers, nurses. And so please don't just use this element to add homes that will be further exploited, but rather stop the bleeding as well on existing units. You know, I know that the city of Santa Barbara is going to be looking at their short-term rentals, but also looking at who is occupying the ADUs? What are the rents being taken on the existing ADUs and other units that are being developed by some of the many, you know, whether it's SB 9, SB 35, I can't keep track of them. But again, a lot of that's going on here in the unincorporated area. Where's it going? Again, is it going to vacation rentals and all of that? Finally, please ensure that the numbers in the previous housing element and community plan updates are accurate. They seem a little low. There was a lot of units upzoned for affordable, and none have been built to my knowledge here in the Eastern Gillette Valley. I don't know why that is. Look at why the existing sites aren't being used. And that's all I have to say tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. We're going to go ahead and go on to our next speaker, Brandon Sparks-Gillis. Go ahead and unmute.
Thank you for the time and for the outreach. First and foremost, I want to just incredibly strongly agree with what Mary just brought up. Speaking from the perspective of a long-term resident of the San Ynez Valley, the issues with supply in the valley are incredibly complicated, and they have been for, well over a decade, frankly, by the increasing trend of available properties being used for short-term rentals and or for second, third, fourth, fifth homes. So I've written some comments previously to some staff, and I will reiterate those during this as well, trying to gear them towards the scoping angle. But I think that we need to take a very strong look at where, what the demand is versus what the supply is. And I think that if we look at RHNA, I just question the numbers flat out. I think that, we need to look at what the use of the housing is, in particularly for, and not even low income. I would use that word very, very broadly, because in order to afford a home in the San Ynez Valley, for instance, I would call low income less than, $200,000 per year household income. It's very difficult to afford to live here, particularly for anyone who works here. So I know that might slightly be getting off topic for the environmental scope, but I just want to reiterate Mary's comments and say that the short-term rental ordinance needs to be very seriously both enforced and perhaps revised significantly. Number two, I would like to just venture a comment or maybe a question as to, will the EIR actually dictate whether we have the water capacity to be able to meet those RHNA numbers? Here in the Valley, the drought is phenomenally difficult. And as a Solvang resident, we're looking at our water prices tripling or at least doubling over the next 5 years. And that includes agricultural water in the town of Solvang is kind of exponentially going up in price. So, I kind of wonder about the logic of building thousands of new units when we're already in a crisis in terms of water. So will the EIR address that? And if it does, please expand that to be as inclusive as possible in terms of looking at the longevity of water supply versus housing supply. So that's a land use issue, among other things. And then the other thing I'd like to mention in this comment period is, as just anecdotally noting, as a really long time Valley resident, the traffic patterns have changed significantly over time. And one of the things that housing could do to alleviate that is to specifically locate specific income tiers of housing closer to various centers of job activity. And I'll relay this specifically to a couple different things. One, first and foremost, is if you look at the vast number of people who commute from Lompoc down to Goleta, Santa Barbara area, that has become astonishing in number. And so I think that there needs to be some land use. I mean, this actually touches on land use, aesthetics, air quality, greenhouse gas, population, and housing. So there's a number of things I looked at in the scoping where this specific issue could cross over, but trying to locate the appropriate priced tier of housing in proximity to where those various jobs are in order to reduce the commute issues and the traffic issues that are coming up. I mentioned Lompoc to Santa Barbara, but San Ynez Valley to Santa Barbara and back and forth is also an issue. Santa Maria Valley into San Ynez Valley is another one. I mean, it's pretty obvious where if you look at where people can find housing that's quote unquote affordable, it's oftentimes a great distance from where a job might be. So policy in order to better locate those and mesh those to reduce traffic going forward, I think is something that's critical and should be clearly addressed in the EIR as a major component. Lastly, and I'm not sure, stop me if this is outside of the scope of the EIR, but some of the things that I've addressed to various county staff is that we need to look at land use policy in relation to all this. So for instance, this could be a thing where the county, I've got a number of different issues on this, ranging from deed restriction to banning investment company ownership of residential properties, to tiering property taxes in order to facilitate first time or actual non-second, third, fourth, fifth home ownership. And I realize I'm running out of time, but I just hope that you can take all of those issues seriously so that we don't end up just creating more traffic, more crowding, more water stress, and more second, third, fourth home ownership up here. That's it.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thanks.
We'll go ahead and turn it over now to Nancy. Go ahead and unmute Nancy.
Nancy Emerson speaking for WeWatch, land use and environmental organization in the San Ynez Valley, and that's the area we focus on. I do feel sorry for the South Coast because how to find the number of units that are being given you to deal with, it's an enormous job for the county staff and for the citizens. I was concerned tonight to find out that this is a PEIR, not just an EIR. We've had so much problem with the PEIR for cannabis in terms of land use issues. And I have a lump somewhere over this, and I would like to have staff talk a little more about this PEIR because the cannabis one had overriding considerations and there was just absolutely nothing that could be done. Now to this EIR, where does what I'm going to call support services for very low and maybe even low income housing fit into transportation and public services? And I'm thinking more of the kind of human needs services that we are seeing being used with the homeless population, and it is clear that it's very important that those kinds of support services be there. And the Buellton land housing element, which was talked about last night, actually has built in some support services in the, and I think that's really important to look at. How will the EIR take into consideration in the land use planning and the public services area the changes in state housing laws that limit local discretion in decision making, For example, density, parking, setbacks. This seems particularly important for the valley where you've talked about housing near the incorporated, unincorporated lines, and also the urban-rural boundaries. So I hope you will find a way to address that. Where does ag employee and farm worker housing fit in? That's important for the valley. How will the EIR weigh the impact on the environment of failure to meet state housing requirements and the potential state penalties? Is there any way to look at that in the EIR? To what extent will the EIR be analyzing specific sites that are designated for housing in the housing element? And I'd appreciate comments tonight on that. The recreation master plan is mentioned in the scoping document. To what extent does it need to consider the work currently being done on agricultural enterprise? I'm not sure there's a connection, but I'm wondering if you need to look at that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Nan. That concludes all of our raised hand attendees. Jesse or Nick, if you'd like to provide any comment, or if anybody else has a question, please raise your hand now. I don't see anybody else raising their hands, so I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Jesse or Nick.
Well, thank you everyone for providing your comments this evening, and I heard a lot of questions out there as well. What would be helpful for us is if you do have a list of questions, I think it would be a little easier for us to answer them if we receive them in a written format, and we can certainly contemplate and respond to those questions. And my email is provided here. You're also welcome to submit written comments, including questions, via hard copy mail as well. Nick, do you have anything else to add?
No, really appreciate all of the comments that you've provided, Mary, Brandon, and Nancy. Thank you very much. We're taking notes on those comments. They will appear in a scoping report that will be appended to the public draft EIR, along with any written comments that are received. And then again, to Jesse's point, for questions, please do contact county staff, and to the extent that answers can be provided on those, that they will be. But with respect to the issues related to the environmental impact analysis, the scoping report will cross-reference where those issues are discussed in the EIR, and we will make sure that the impact analysis around these issues is robust and answers the questions. So again, thanks everyone for your participation. This is really helpful on the front end of EIR preparation, and we'll look forward to receiving any additional verbal comment or additional written comments that others have to submit. So thank you again for participation.
Okay. Well, great. With that, I think I'll stop the recording here. And again, the recording of this meeting will be posted on our project webpage within the next week, I'd say. So thank you everyone for your attendance this evening. Have a good night.